Good evening, friends. I, Dr. Devis Bandel, Associate Professor, Suresh Gyan Vihar University, Rajasthan, that is accredited by NAC A grade. Today I will discuss about SQL constraints. And now I am sharing my PPT. I hope you can see my PPT. You know, SQL is the major important part of your DBMS because through the SQL you will write the query. And if you are making a software, your software is the part of two things like your front end and your back end. In your front end, you will use the any programming language like your C, C++, Java, C Sharp, etc. And in your back end, you will use the DBMS. If you are having a software, if you are making a software and you are not using the DBMS, so without DBMS, your software is nothing because in your through the DBMS you can store the data, you can update the data, you can alter the data, and many operations you can do with your DBMS. That's why your SQL is the important thing of your DBMS. And if you are using the SQL, so through the SQL you will write the query, you will insert the data in your database, you can update the data in your database. And there are so many constraints of your SQL, and today I will discuss about SQL not null and unique constraints. First of all, I will discuss about object and outcome of your DBMS. The object of your DBMS to emphasize the concept of your DBMS, to emphasize the concept of ER model, to emphasize the concept of your normalization, to emphasize the concept of your SQL. And after yesterday database management system, student will learn, student will able to how to make a ER diagram, how to write the query through the SQL. And now we will discuss about object and outcome of this lecture. The and to understand the concept of your constraints, this is the object of your this lecture. And if we will talk about the outcome of this lecture, to be able to how to apply the constraints, this is the outcome of this lecture. And now during this lecture I will explain few many topics like your what is constraints, what are the types of your constraints, not null constraints, and your unique constraints. And after end of this lecture I will discuss about some questions which are related from this lecture. So, your SQL constraint is the important part of your SQL. And now I will discuss about SQL constraint. you know First of all, we will discuss about what is constraint in your SQL. You know, your SQL, your SQL is your structure query language. And through this language, you will write the query. And through this query, you can create the table, you can insert the data into table, you can update the data, you can alter the data, you can read the database, you can read the table. And now here we will discuss about what is constraints in your SQL. SQL constraints are used to specify a rule for data in a table. That means constraints means a rule. If we will talk about the constraints in SQL, so means when you will apply the rule, a rule for the data in the table in your SQL, that is your constraint. And in a one point about the constraint, Constraint means your rule. You will apply the rules, you will specify the rules for a data into a table. That is the constraint. And now, how to create the SQL constraint? As per I had told, your constraint is a rule. Your constraint is a specified rule, and your rule will apply on a data into a table. And now I will discuss about SQL create constraints. If we will talk about SQL create constraint can be specified when the table is created. If you have to create the table already, so you can specify the constraint. And if you have not created the table, means if you are not having table, that time you can't create a constraint, because your constraints will apply on a data, and your data, data into a table with the create table statement. you know when you will create the table in your SQL, the syntax of your create table in SQL, you will use the create table command. You will write when you will write the query when you want to create a table, create table, table name, and after that you will specify the all columns of a table, all columns with the data type. You know, a table is a collection of your columns. Table is the collection of your attributes, and your database. You know, when you will use the database, in your database you will create the so many tables, and when you will create a table, so you can create in your table you can create a one or more than one attribute. Okay, so when you will create the table through the create table command, so you will write the syntax create table, table name, and also you will specify the all column name with data type and your size. This is the syntax of your table. And if you want to specify the constraint, if you want to apply the constraint, so your constraint will apply when the table is already created with the create table statement, or after the table is created with alter table statement. Okay, you know when you will create a table, so you will write create table, table name, and as per I had told, you will create the all attributes, you will create the all columns with the data type. Okay, and here I am describing about the SQL create constraints through the create table command. So as per I had told, your create table command is create table, table name, column 2, column 3, dot dot dot. If you want to create a only three columns, so you will write only create table, table name, and you will create the three column name with data type. And if you want to more than one columns, so you will write column 1, column 2, column 3, dot 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 dot. And also, after the after created the column name with data type, you will specify the constraint. And here in this syntax, I have to specify the three constraint on your three column name. First, your first column name, data type. Second, column 2, data type. Third, column 3, data type. And your constraints, you have to specify the constraint on your first column name. You have to specify the constraint on your second column name. You have to specify the constraint on your third column name. Okay, means here I had to specify three columns with the three constraint. Means your constraint will apply the individual column. Your constraints will apply the three columns. In your first column one, constraint one. Second column two, second constraint. Third column three, third constraint. So mean this is the syntax for your SQL create constraints. And after that, SQL constraints are used to specify rules for the data into a table. As per I had told, constraint means specify the rule, and your rule will apply on data into a table. That's why I am telling SQL constraint are used to specify rules for the data into a table, and constraints are used to limit the type of data that can go into a table. This ensures the accuracy and reliability of the data in the table. You know, if you will specify the rule, if you will specify the constraint, so through the constraint, you will ensure the accuracy and readability of data into a table. If there is any violation between the constraint and the data action, the action is aborted. Okay, and constraints can be column level or level or table level. Column level constraints apply to a column, and the table level constraints apply to the whole table. you know your constraint can be a column name, or means your constraint you can apply on your column, and also you can apply on a table. Column level constraints apply to a column, and your table level constraints apply to the whole table. And so your constraints are two type. Your first type is that your column level constraint, and your second type is your table level constraint. If you want to apply the constraints on your column name, if you want to apply the constraints on your column name, that is your column level constraints. And if you will apply the constraints on a table name, that is your table level constraints. Means you can apply the constraints on your column name, and also you can apply the constraints on your whole table name, whole table. And now, you know there are so many constraints used in your SQL. Means you can say that there are so many rules, and you can apply the rules in your SQL. First is not null. You know, as per I had told, there are so many constraints in your SQL, like your not null constraints, unique constraints, primary key constraint, Oregon key constraint, check constraint, default constraint, and your create index constraint. These are the all rules. These are the all constraints, and you can apply these constraints. And I will discuss about all constraints one by one. First of all, I will discuss about the not null constraint. Your not null constraint ensure that a column cannot have a null value. If you have to specify a not null constraint, if you will apply a not null constraint, and through the not null constraint, you will ensure your column cannot have a null value. That is your not null constraint. Okay, suppose if you are having a table, and in your table there are so many columns, and your suppose salary is the one of the column of your table. Okay, and you want your salary column not a null. Every time your salary column not a null, so that time you will specify a not null constraint on that particular column name. On that particular column name means on that particular your salary column, because your aim is salary column should not a null. Okay, and that time you will specify the not null constraint on that particular column, on that particular salary column. Okay, and as per I had told, through the not null constraint, you will ensure your column name, your column cannot have a null value. That's why you will specify the not null constraint on that particular column. And about a second constraint is your unique constraint. Unique constraint ensure that the all value in a column are different. Unique means unique. Unique means individual. Means ensure that the all value in a column are different. Okay. So that time you will specify the unique constraint. Maybe sometime in your column name, and in your are column name are a same value. Okay, that's why through the unique constraint ensure that all value in a column are different. Okay, that's why you will use the unique constraint. And second constraint is your primary key constraint. Third constraint is your primary key constraint. That is your most important constraint of your primary key. You know, primary key constraint a combination of a not null and unique. Your primary key constraint is the combination of your not null constraint and your unique constraint. Uniquely identify each row in a table. That is the primary objective of your primary key constraint, right? Means through the primary key constraint, you will uniquely identify each row in a table through the primary key constraint. And also you can say that your primary key constraint is the combination of your not null constraint and your unique constraint. And as per I had told, through the not null constraint, your column cannot have a null value. Through the not null constraint and through the unique constraint, ensure that all values in a column are different. That's why I had told your primary key is the combination of your not null constraint and your unique constraint. And again, I am describing about the primary key constraint. Through the primary key constraint, uniquely identify each row in a table. And next is your foreign key constraint. And foreign key constraint, and and now I will discuss about a foreign key constraint. Prevent action that would destroy link between tables. That is the objective of your foreign key constraint. Means if you will apply the foreign key constraint to prevent action that would destroy link between the tables. That is your foreign key constraint. And now check constraint. Ensure that the value in a column satisfy a specific condition. That is the basic objective of your check constraint. The main motive of your check constraint is that ensure that the value in a column satisfy a specific condition. And now next is your default constraint. Default constraint set a default value for a column if no value is specified. Means when you want to define a default value, that time you will use the default constraint. And through the default constraint, set a default value for a column if no value is specified. Means if you are not specifying any value, if you are not specifying a no value, so through the default constraint you can set a default value for a particular column. And next is your check index constraint. Used to create and retrieve data from the database very quickly. That is the objective of your create index. These are the all constraints of your SQL, like your node null constraint, as per I had told, unique constraint, primary key constraint, foreign key constraint, check constraint, default constraint, and your create index constraint. Okay, and now, as per I had told in this lecture, I will mainly focus on two types of your constraint in your SQL constraint. In your SQL, like your SQL not null constraint, and second is your unique constraint. And now, first of all, I will discuss about SQL not null constraint. Okay. By default, a column can hold null value. By default means automatic. Okay, like your in your SQL, when you will apply the order by clause, so if you will not specify that you want to columns value in your ascending order and in your descending order, and if you want to find the columns value in your ascending order, so you will not specify the ASC, because ASC is the default value. Okay, if you will not specify ASC and not a DSC, so automatic your columns value will be display in your ascending order. And if you will specify in your in a DESC in your order by clause, so your column value will display in your descending order. So in the same manner, by default, a column can hold the null value. And the not null constraint enforce a column is not accept a null value. If you will specify the not null rule, if you will specify the not null constraint, so your not null constraint enforce a column to not accept the null value, means your column never accept a null value. Okay, and this enforce a field to always contain a value. If your column through the not null constraint will never get a null value, so means that time you can say that your column field always contain a value, which means that you cannot insert a new record or update a record without adding a value to this field. Okay, so that is the motive of your not null constraint. First motive is that not null constraint. If you have to specify the not null constraint, so your column value cannot be null. This is the first motive of your not null constraint. And the second motive is that if your column value cannot be null, so always your column have a some value. Okay, this is your second motive. And and your field will always contain a value, which means when you can't insert a new record or update a record without adding a value to this field. This is the third motive of your SQL constraint. And now, SQL not null on create table. The following SQL ensure that ID, ID is your column name, last name is your column name, and first name is your column, will not accept a null value when the person table is created. In this table, if you will create a person table, your your id, last name, first name columns are the columns of your percent table, and you want through the query, your query will ensure the id, last name and first name column will not accept a null value when you will create a person table. Means the motive of this query, when you will create a table of your person, that time your columns of your person tables like are id, last name and first name not to be a null value, not accept a null value. So that means you will write the query for this purpose. Here you will specify the constraint not null, because as per the query you will specify the not null constraint, and as per I had told, through the not null constraint your column value will never accept a null value. That's why for achieving the goal for object of your query, you will specify the not null constraint. In this manner, when you will create a table, so you will use the create table command, create table name, and you, as per your query, you will create a table person name. So create table persons, and as per the query you will create a three column name. First column name is your id, second column name is your last name, and third column name is your first name. So your and also you you will specify a not null constraint in your three columns like your id, last name and first name. So you will write id is your column name, into your data type, and not null is your constraint. And in the same manner, in your second column you will write last name is your column name, where is your data type, and not null constraint. And your first name is your column name, where is your data type, not null is your constraint. And age is the another column of your table. So means through this table, as per the query, when you will create a person table, and there are four columns on your person table: id, last name, first name and your age. And as per the query objective, your id, last name and first name will never accept a null value. Okay, and your age will accept a null value, but your id, last name and first name will never accept a null value. That's why you have to specify a not null constraint. Okay, so this is the example of your not null constraint. Your not null constraint will apply on a create table. And now, SQL not null on alter table. Okay. To create a not null constraint on the age column when the person table is already created using the following SQL. Alter table person modify age int not null. Okay. Your alter table will use for the modify, and for the example, to create a not null constraint on the age column when the person table is already created. So use the following SQL. Alter table, alter table is the keyword. And person, person is your table name. Modify age into not null. Okay, so this is your SQL not null on your alter table. And now, second column is your SQL unique constraint. As per I had told, there are so many constraints of your SQL table, like your not null constraint, like your unique constraint, like your primary key constraint, like your foreign key constraint, like your default constraint. And as per the objective of this lecture, in this lecture I will discuss about the ordinal constraint and your unique constraint. And I had already discussed about the ordinal constraint, And now I will discuss about the SQL constraint. You know, the unique constraint ensures that all value in a column are different. Unique, unique means different. The unique constraint ensures that all value in a column are different. Both the unique and primary key constraint provide a guarantee for uniqueness for a column or set of columns. Okay, means both the unique constraint and another constraint is your primary key constraint provide a guarantee for uniqueness for a column or set of columns. And a primary key constraint automatically has a unique constraint. Okay, as per I had told at the beginning of this lecture, your primary key constraint is the combination of your not null constraint and your unique constraint. That's why I am telling a primary key constraint automatically has a unique constraint. And however, you can have more unique constraint per table, but only one primary key constraint per table. Okay, this is your unique constraint. And now, SQL unique constraint on a create table. The following SQL creates a unique constraint on the ID column when the person table is created. Your example is that you will create a unique constraint on the ID column when the person table is created. Suppose your person table has already created and you will write a query, create a unique constraint on the ID column. You will write on your SQL server if you will use the Oracle, if you will use the MS Access. You know, First of all, you will create a table. Your table will be created through a create table command. Create table persons. Persons is your table name. And ID is your column name. Int is your data type. Not null. Means here are two constraints. Not null and your unique. Unique is the another constraint and your not null is the another constraint. Through the not null constraint, your ID column will accept a value. Your ID column will not accept a null value, and your unique and through the unique constraint for identify a unique value. So your ID is your ID on your ID column. I have to apply the two constraint, not null constraint and a unique constraint. And your last name is another column with your data type is your varchar, and your not null constraint and your first name varchar and your age int. Here, I have to apply the two constraint on your ID column of this table person and your not null constraint I have to apply on your last name column of your person table. And now, if we will use the MySQL, okay, in your when you will use the MySQL, when you will create a table in your MySQL, the create table persons as the same thing. ID is your column name, int is your data type, not null is your constraint, last null and last name, not null is your. I have to apply the not null constraint on your ID column and your last name column, and in your first name, I have not apply the any constraint, and your age is your integer, and unique is your, and age int, and unique ID, and unique is the another constraint on your ID in your MySQL. When you will write the query in your MySQL, so you will write this query in your MySQL in this manner. And to name a unique constraint, add or define a unique constraint on multiple columns, use the following SQL syntax. MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, and MS Access. Sorry. Create table person. ID is a ID into not null constraint. Not null constraint I have to apply it on your ID and your last name and your first name. You have to not apply the any constraint. Is int apply the constraint UC person unique ID dot last name. And SQL unique constraint on a alter table to create a unique constraint on the ID column when the table is already created. As per I told using the following SQL, MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, and your MS Access. Alter table person add unique ID. Your unique is your constraint. As per I told, unique constraint on your alter table. So here you will apply the unique constraint on your alter table in this manner. You will write alter table person and add unique ID. Okay, and now to name a unique constraint and to define a unique constraint on multiple columns, use the following SQL syntax: MySQL oblique SQL Server oblique Oracle oblique MS Access. Add table persons, add constraint UC underscore person and unique ID dot last name. And now you will apply the drop a unique constraint. To drop a unique constraint, use the following SQL. And if you will write in your MySQL alter table person drop index UC underscore person. And in your when you will write in your SQL Server, Oracle, and MS Access, alter table person drop constraint UC underscore person. And now, as per I had told, end of this lecture, I will discuss about the some questions, and these questions are related from this lecture. And in this lecture, I had discussed about the constraints on your SQL, and now I am discussing about the some questions which are related from this lecture. Your first question is that which of the following is not a class of constraint in SQL Server? First option is that not null, check, null, and your unique. Your question objective is that which of the following is not a class of constraint in SQL Server? Okay, not null is the constraint. As per I had discussed when I was discussing about the all constraints of your SQL, like your not null constraint, unique constraint, your check constraint, primary key constraint, default constraint, foreign key constraint, and so your not null is the constraint, check check is the constraint, null null is not a constraint in your SQL server. And unique is already constraint, means your not null is constraint, check is constraint, and your unique is constraint. That's why your answer will be a null is not a constraint. Okay, that's why your answer will be your C answer. And second question is that point out the correct statement. Check constraint enforce domain integrity. Second option is that unique constraint enforce the uniqueness of the value in a set of columns. And your third is that in a unique constraint, no two rows in the table can have the same value for the columns. And your fourth option is the all of the above. So all are here. I have to specify the three statement. And in your fourth statement, I have mentioned the all. So means your A